Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Alison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide.
Hello, preschool peeps.
Hi, peeps.
We're going to talk about intentional reflection with young children to teach them how to do that.
Because adults don't know how to.
That's why I wanted to talk about it. Part of the work that I do as a consultant is to help people to reflect. Adults have a really hard time reflecting. I can tell you, though, it's not easy for me as a practice either. Yeah. When people ask reflective questions, I have to give it a minute. You know, we weren't so much raised with people intentionally teaching us how to reflect, like they teach us how to intentionally think about a story we've heard, or, people will teach us very intentionally how to think about a math problem or how to think about literacy, but they don't always teach us about thinking about the actions that we've taken. And I think that that's an important thing to do with young children. Sometimes we'll say things to them like, remember when we went to the pumpkin patch?
Yeah.
That was fun, right?
Yeah.
And we kind of like it.
That was fun. And then we're done.
Goes.
Okay. Do you remember it? Check. Do you not? Yeah. Okay. Nope.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
it. Yeah.
You know, and sometimes the children will say things like, yeah, we saw the pumpkins and scarecrows. And we go, that's right. Wasn't that fun?
Yeah,
but it's not really an intentional conversation to teach them the skill of reflection so that as they get older, they are able to do that.
Yeah.
So Alison, when someone says to you something like, we're going to reflect on this experience or this ability, or
I always think of reflecting on that almost as what role did I play in that? And how could I either have done that better, or what things did I do good? Because to me, like, reflecting always was like, you reflect on that so that you can improve yourself kind of thing. And I don't know if that's right, because I was not taught how to reflect when I was a kid, but that's how I always thought of it.
Well, I think some of it is, helping children to think about what they learned during an experience. That's part of reflection.
Yeah.
To say, remember when we went to the pumpkin patch? What did we learn there? What do we want to do differently next time? What do we want to do the same next time? I think that those are important questions to ask, because when I let's say I wanted to reflect on something in my life, reflect on an experience I had with my parents, let's say, which would be years ago, right? And I want to reflect on that. I should be thinking about, what was it like? What did it feel like? What memories does it bring up? What does that feel like? What went well? What would I change? What did I learn from it? These are the questions we should be asking. It's almost like when we do reading comprehension questions with children.
Yeah.
We're doing a read aloud and we'll say to them, how do you think the character feels or felt? Or we should be saying these things. How do you think the character felt? What do you think the character did that was good? What do you think the character could do differently? We're teaching them to think about the actions of a character in a book, but we also need to teach them to think about the actions of themselves in the same way, like we do a random character in a book. Yeah. Though I will say during read alouds, it's something also that adults have to learn how to do, because very often we concentrate only on the plot and not the feelings and experiences of the character.
Yeah.
Well, which goes back to, we weren't taught to do that.
We weren't taught to do that, but it's funny that is brought up, because I think when I do read alouds with children, I very much focus on the characters and the feelings and stuff, but I think I'm just used to doing that. But when I read books for my own pleasure, it's all plot driven. I don't care how they feel. I'm not thinking of oh, what would I do in this situation? No, I want to know what they're going to do. But when I read with children, I'm so different. So maybe I need to bring that into my regular adult life. But I think, again, was not taught how to do this as a child. Therefore, now I'm just deficient at it. I guess I don't know.
I don't know. I don't think you're deficient. I don't think that's deficient. I think, first of all, we have to recognize that young children struggle with working memory because working memory is governed in the prefrontal cortex of the brain where executive function is housed. Working memory is part of executive function. And so it's a skill and brain connections that they're first building. So we want to constantly recall with them. It's why we read the same book or should read the same book several times at pretty close intervals, because we're helping that to build that recall. We have for generations had conversations with children like, do you remember when we went to the pumpkin patch? We're trying to build recall, right? Based on experience, not on some sort of rote, here's what the numbers are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not that kind of recall. I'm talking about recall of events. So we will often say, oh, what happened on your vacation? Tell me about your vacation. We're building recall, but we need to intentionally build recall short term and long term. So we need to work with children to reflect on things that happened maybe in the last few weeks, and then a few months ago, and then maybe longer than that if they're able to do that, right? If they're old enough to do that. We also need to sort of have them internalize the questions that we ask ourselves when we're having a meaningful reflection, which is, how did that feel? What was happening? And how did I react? What was good about it? What was challenging about it? What would we do the same? What would we do different? So even that conversation that we all have after you take children to a pumpkin patch, and we say, remember when we went to the pumpkin patch? To say, how did you feel at the pumpkin patch? What did we do well? What would you do the same? Is even better than what we did well. What would you do the same? What would you do different next time you go? Right? I think it's important to do that whole, what would you do the same and what would you do differently with young children, because it's okay to think, well, next time I go, I want to do this thing more that I didn't do. It's okay to take an experience and realize, oh, it wasn't the epitome of everything that could have been done. And next time I would do it differently, because then that builds the skill that as adults, when we look back, we're able to say, it's okay if everything isn't perfect. Next time I do this, I'm going to do it a little differently.
Because I think for children also, like, it teaches them where they were and where they are now, right? Like, we went to the pumpkin patch in October. It is now what, March, April. All right. So what you do differently might be something like, well, you know what? I really didn't pay attention on the school bus or something, right? But this time I would, because I'm older and I know the rules of the school bus because I've been in school for 6 months. It might be something like that. And then you could be like, oh, that's right. Look how much we've learned. On our next field trip, we will know, how to ride the school bus. Like, it's kind of shows them like, oh, wait, I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm experiencing things. And through that experience, I've grown into this new person that, has all these skills. And I think that's good for them to see, because I don't think they always see it. They don't realize it, like we see it, but they don't, so then I think it gets them thinking about their own thinking and their own learning.
Right. You're right. I think that they none of us realize the growth unless we look back. I had a conversation with my son recently. I was telling him about something that I learned that he knows I had a very different viewpoint of years ago. And we're talking, a couple decades ago. My son is 30. So he knows that when he was very young, I had a different viewpoint about this. And he said to me, Mom, do you ever think back about this time and realize how much you've grown in your thinking about that? And wow. Right. And I said to him, I sort of realize it, but I've never really sat in it. And he's like, you should, because that's like amazing human growth, Mom. I know how you felt back then. And I can see that your opinion has changed, and that's okay. That's growth,
It's okay.
And I think when we say to children, when they say something like, I can just picture them saying something like, when we went to the pumpkin patch, I was afraid to go on the hayride, and next time I'm not going to be scared.
Exactly.
And we can say to them, that's a growing moment. You're growing.
You're
Good
growing.
for you.
You're becoming braver. You're getting more confidence in yourself.
When I worked every day with young children in a classroom as a teacher, I used to like to point out their growing moments. And I would say to them, that's a growing moment. You're growing.
Yeah.
You know, when they were like, I couldn't do this before, or I was afraid of this before, and now I'm going to do it, or I can do it. And I would say to them, because you had a growing moment.
Yeah.
Good for you.
I say that at school. I tell them that they're making their brain smarter. You know, I was like, "Ooh, you made your brain smarter." You know, and they get all like, "Ooh, yay!" You know, I say that to them. Or I say, "Do you want to make your brain smarter? Here's what you can do." You know, and then they do it. You know, after like trying, and I was like, "See, you made your brain smarter," and they feel like they've achieved something. You know, that they're like almost like building this like arsenal of things they know how to do. You know, this, and you could see the light go off on them where they're like, oh wow, I'm actually doing something. You know?
And how do children build confidence? By knowing they can succeed.
Yeah.
So if we keep pointing out, we reflect back, we talk about what you would do the same, what you might do differently, and we point out that growth, it helps to build their self-worth and their sense of self, which is so important when you're young, to have that sense of self. And the knowledge, by the way, the knowledge that what is life? It's a journey of growth.
Right.
You know, there is no ultimate perfection. It's just a journey of growth. Yeah. Of learning about the world around you and learning about yourself. Something that I think we never get done doing.
No. Yeah.
And if we knew from the time we were young, okay, there's no endpoint in not only learning the facts of your world, but also learning about yourself, I think that can help people with their mental health, that we're just constantly learning about ourselves. And that's a good thing. Yeah. That's okay. And it was okay if you were afraid back then. It's okay if you're still afraid. Yeah. It's also really okay if you're not anymore. It means that you've had some sort of growth. Yeah. You know, I could also picture children looking back. I keep using this pumpkin patch story because it's just such a typical conversation that I had with children. But I could also picture people saying, you know, what would you do the same? Oh, what I would do the same. I wouldn't want to go on that hayride. I was scared, and I'll still be scared.
I'm still not.
Okay. Okay. So what would you do differently? And that just should be okay. Yeah. We shouldn't be looking at them saying, oh my gosh, but you're 6 months older. Don't be so afraid. Or we shouldn't be doing that.
Make it a conversation. Okay. You still don't want to go on the hayride. What can we do that would make it more appealing to you? You know, and see if there's anything, because maybe there is something, and maybe it's something
If it was me, I would have said absolutely nothing. There's nothing you can do to convince me.
That's okay too. But you know what I mean? Because I do that at school. I'm like, well, if you don't tell me, I can't help you. But if you tell me, maybe I can figure out a way that the hayride goes slower or whatever. I don't know, whatever you might think that makes it more appealing, or or less scary, and maybe it's something I can arrange, and maybe it's not, right. But at least now I know, okay, you don't want to go on the hayride because of this,
right?
And maybe that's something we can work on for next year when we go to the pumpkin patch, but like, I think knowing why sometimes can be a learning experience.
I agree.
Something really super simple, like, and you're like, oh, well, that we could fix that, and there you go. Now you're braver.
Yeah. But again, everybody's got their different temperament. It's okay for them to be who they are. And when they reflect, if they look back and say, I wouldn't do anything differently. Yeah. My response is, okay, then you were happy with what happened. That's great. Yes. Right? Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. But I get to sort of restate those questions in some way. We want them to talk about how it was, how they felt, what they remember. Mm-hmm. Let them tell us, not us telling them. That's how things happen that we think are our own memories, but actually they're not, because someone told us so much about it. We want their own memories. So we want to say, what do you remember? What happened there? What would you do the same? What would you do differently? And another question I think is important when we do reflection is to say to children, what are you grateful for? What are you happy, right? Thankful happened. What are you grateful for? Because gratitude practices are also very, very important as children get older, to keep in mind that we all always have something to be grateful for. Yeah. And, it doesn't have to be a whole bunch of material things. It can be people, it can be time, it can be experiences, it can be things that are not as tangible as like the gifts I got for the holidays or the gifts I got for my birthday. Right. When we went to the pumpkin patch, what were you glad about? What were you grateful for at that pumpkin patch? And we start with something really concrete like that so that they're better able to talk about gratitude later.
Yeah.
One of the things I always try to have, and I bought a new system for it. I try to have a gratitude practice because I feel like in times that can be very chaotic, that it grounds me and it reminds me that there's so much good happening in my life all the time, even when things may be challenging. So I've always had some sort of, or for years, not always, for years, I've had some sort of gratitude practice. Sometimes it happens when I'm journaling. Sometimes I'll buy a particular tool that's just about gratitude. Yeah. Sometimes it's just me sitting before I get out of bed in the morning, thinking about 3 things I'm really grateful for. Or before I go to bed at night, what 3 things happened today that I'm really grateful for? And I really do like it at the end of the day like that. And I think that's an important thing to teach children too, to sit them down at that end of school day, large group gathering, or at home to sit them down at night and say, what happened today that you're happy happened? Yeah. What are you grateful for from today?
Yeah.
I think that's a very, very important reflection for young children.
I like that. I might start doing that actually.
It's,
the school day, I think that's a good way to wrap things up.
Yeah. To say to them, what are you grateful happened today?
Yeah.
And because it also just sets you sort of on a positive mindset, I think.
Yeah.
Good for the mental health to have a gratitude practice.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to us now, preschool peeps, and you don't have your own gratitude practice, develop one. Yeah. Even like I said, if it's just sitting at the end of the day thinking, what 3 things happened today that you're grateful for? And they don't have to be big things, Sometimes I would sit and think, I'm grateful that my husband got home a little early from work. Yeah. I'm grateful that I had a chance to talk to Alison today. I'm grateful, it doesn't have to be these huge, tremendous things. And I think sometimes we attach reflection and gratitude to giant things.
I remember when I used to do the whole gratitude journal thing, right? And every single time, number 1 on the day was always my dog, right? Because as much as that dog can be a total pain, there is also so much joy there. And every time I come home, he's happy to see me. He provides me cuddles when I need cuddles. Sometimes he's just funny and it makes you laugh. So I would always put Rusty, just Rusty being in your life. And it's such a simple thing because no matter what, he's here every day, and he was always something. So even when times are really, really bad, I'd be like, oh, but at least I have that. You know what I mean? And then you're like, okay, that's something. But then you could always find other things, I think, too. Like sometimes it is like, there was no traffic to get to work today. You know what I mean? Or, your husband coming home 5 minutes early, or like something small, or, there was no troubles today during whatever it is. And that's just easy stuff. It doesn't have to be these material things. And I think most of the time it's not the material things. Not that we shouldn't be grateful that we have a home or a car or, but I think most of the time when I think of gratitude, I don't think of the material things.
I think it's okay. Children are very concrete thinkers, and they may say that. They may say, I'm grateful for the trains and the blocks and the crayons. And that's fine.
Okay, yeah.
Because they're concrete like that.
And I think that's the start of thinking about gratitude. Yes, you are thankful for those things. You are, those things do make you happy, and then as they get older, you can branch into what experiences made you happy today.
And some of them may say that, or they may say something like, I'm what made you happy today? Grandma dropped me off. Yeah. They may say things like that. Yeah. I think it also gives us a little insight as to the priorities of the children. We think children, we don't think priorities, but they do have priorities. Yeah. So I think that it gives us a little bit of knowledge about what matters to each child. Yeah. And so then we can tailor what we do for the children who are sitting in front of us, Yeah. So if you're going to do these intentional reflection with children, maybe where people start is that large group time at the end of the day in an early childhood setting before the children go home saying, let's name 3 things, think about 3 things or 2 things, depending on their age, 1 thing that we're really happy happened today. Yeah. Or we're happy to have had today. Yeah. What are we grateful for? And if you're doing this at home with children, end of the day reflection. Yeah. How did today go? What was good? What was not so good? What are we grateful for? Yeah. What would you do differently? Some families I know they'll do, they'll have conversations where they say the best thing today, the worst thing today. Yeah. As a family, what was your best thing? What was your worst thing?
And I think that's a good thing too, is talking about the worst things. Because I think so often we ask like, hey, how was your day? Oh, it was great. What happened that was so good today? And then you're not discovering maybe something really awful that happened. You might discover like, you know, it could be anything. Maybe there's bullying going on. Maybe math is giving your child trouble, but you won't know unless you ask.
Yeah.
You know, so if you say, what's the worst part of today? And every single day your child says, math class was awful today. Maybe now I need to see, okay, let me see what's going on with math class. Maybe there's something that I could talk to the teacher about. Maybe it's something I could help them with. Or it might be like, hey, I saw little Johnny get bullied today. Okay, now maybe we can go help Johnny, you know, like, so I think hearing about some of the worst parts of the day might give you some insight of like, okay, here's how I can help them and guide them through these issues. You know, otherwise they might just hold it all in and not say anything, you know, but then you want them to talk about those bad times too. Cause like when they're older and something really bad happens, they know, oh, I can talk to them about that.
Right. And, you know, I think you're right. I think it's really important to talk about what was your best, what was your worst when they get, especially when they get a little older. We want children to know they can talk about it with us. And then we can help guide them. Yeah. What was your best? What was your worst? I should start doing that for every day.
Every day.
Like now, what was my best? What was my worst? Yeah. And it's okay to say the worst out loud.
Yes.
It's often things beyond our control. So there may not be anything you can do about it, but it's good to verbalize it.
Yeah, it's good to verbalize it. Mm-hmm. It's good to know, you know, you're getting insight into the children, you know,
but the conversation has to be intentional. It can't just be, how was your day? You need to be able to ask leading questions or have these statements like, we're going to do best and worst. Yes. You know, one of my favorite things from This Is Us was when I loved that show. And it was when Beth and Randall would play worst case scenario. Loved that. When something was worrying them and they were like, let's play worst case scenario. And they would say the worst, absolute worst thing that could happen in that situation.
And it was like wild stuff too.
Yes,
like,
it was. It was great. Happen. It was so great. I loved that. Yeah. I loved that. And ever since I saw them do that on the TV show, you know, when things are worrying my children or me or my husband, I'd be like, can we play worst case scenario? Because I just want to get that out of my head.
I just did that with you. Remember before we were, I was like, what's the worst that's going to happen?
What's the worst that's going to happen?
Okay.
You're
that's
right.
the worst. You know, like
You're right. Worst case scenario is not always the worst thing.
Yeah. It's not always bad. It's just, all right, we'll move on. You know, like it's not, and then you realize, okay, then it doesn't really matter what I do here. Like, it's not the end of the world if I make one decision differently, because if it doesn't happen, I don't, all right.
I mean, playing worst case scenario is more like projecting than reflecting.
Yes.
But in order to be able to do that, you also have to be able to reflect on your experiences.
Yeah.
You know, reflection is so much more than just an exercise people force you to do at a staff meeting or something. It really is an important life practice to teach young children.
Yeah.
And speaking of reflection and gratitude, I would like to express my gratitude to you like that?
I do.
I'm always segueing this
to
the preschool peeps who are in India, who have suddenly entered our top 10 of countries listening to this podcast. So thank you, preschool peeps of India. Yeah. I would also like to express a little curiosity and gratitude to the people of Livingston, New Jersey. Yeah. We are in New Jersey, so we're always sort of laughing when New Jersey isn't in our top ratings. Yeah. New Jersey was in our top ratings, but when I clicked on New Jersey in our stats, it was Livingston that came up like head and shoulders above any other town or city in the state of New Jersey. I don't know what's going on there, Livingston. Kind of curious how you suddenly found us, but hey, thanks for being here.
Yeah, I know. It's like 20 minutes from where I live, you know, so I was like, ooh, something in my county. At least I think it's in my, you know, I was like, ooh, somewhere by me. Because usually Cindy will give me a city in New Jersey. I'm like, I don't know where that is. But this one I knew.
Livingston. So yeah, little known fact, when I was way, way back in the day getting my bachelor's degree, I actually did go and observe classrooms in Livingston, New Jersey. Yeah. So I've been to a couple of schools in Livingston way, way back in the day. They probably look very different.
Yeah.
Okay, so hey, if you're listening and you're in Livingston and you know why we've suddenly exploded in Livingston, would you please go to howpreschoolteachersdoit.com and send us why on the contact form? Because I would love to know.
We just want to know why.
Also on that website, you can find like, how do I connect to them on Patreon for more episodes and blog articles that other listeners are enjoying, and to help us to continue to do the work we do here, which just like all other inflation continues to go up in price, the fees that we pay to do this. And you can also find resources and other things on the website and that contact form. So feel free to go there. Okay. I want you all to go and think about how you're going to reflect with young children and purposefully teach them to do that. And we will catch you next time on this podcast.
Yeah. Bye, peeps.